Hello? All right. So, first off, to all you crazy, well, I probably can't say what I was about to. Crazy
We promise
cats.
we keep it clean.
All right, I'll keep it clean. Well, the story.
Yeah,
Yeah, all right, well.
Just gloss over that.
I want to apologize to Christopher in front of God and you all people because I really told him I would try to dress like Dean Martin, and I didn't really do well, and he did much better than me. You are a slick Ricky.
Thank
Yeah, right on. All right, I gotta change out of my sunglasses because I'm almost blind. Crazy. Okay, so I guess I'll frame this first. Well, he did a little bit. You know, this book really is springboarded off of a trip I took in 1989 across the country with a really good buddy of mine, and yeah, we were kind of fleeing adversity at home and hit adversity all over the place. You know, like best laid plans and all that sort of stuff. But it would kind of turn into a wild adventure, and this is a small part of it. This is chapter 2. It's called Running West. The sign read, "Where America Begins." We'd crossed from New York State into the long green hell of Pennsylvania. Jackie Stewart of Formula One fame, a 3-time world champion, described the Nürburgring in Germany, a 17.5-mile-long racetrack that circles a castle, as the green hell. The Nordschleife, as it's called, is an undulating, surprising stretch of asphalt that wound through hill and stream, and this described routes 84 and 80 through the state. With the exception of the old coal mining towns of Scranton and Wilkes-Barre, where a sort of urban sprawl existed. The afternoon turned dark and rainy as we hauled ass across wandering ridges of eastern Pennsylvania. Some hours earlier, Jack and I had rolled out of Newtown and crossed familiar territory heading west, through our romping grounds around the small local city of Danbury, which at that time was a well-washed-out, once thriving community, now boarded up with windows and run-down homes were common. Main Street was a ghost town aside from Sears and a couple other businesses. Danbury used to make hats. In fact, the Stetson Hats Company manufactured hats in Danbury as well as many other hat companies, with over 430 million hats churned out in 1909 at peak hat. As the fortunes of the hat-making world devolved, so did Danbury. The last hat factory closed in 1987. Like so many small communities that's prosperity depended on manufacturing and industry, whose immediate future would be tied to the industries that supported them, Danbury's downfall was not unique. A trend that grew in the 70s snowballed in the 80s and became evident all through America: decay. It never left some locales. You can judge it by the last era in which buildings were built or upgraded or even maintained in many towns. Phrases like "nothing changed here since the 1950s or 60s" became relevant. Life in America had changed and was changing even faster by the 80s. It was a new world of conservatism, corporate power, money lust, capital maximization, and cocaine. Lots and lots of cocaine. Reagan in the 80s stomped all over whatever lay in their way. The 80s were like a giant swamp monster from a Super Friends cartoon made up of Duran Duran and Reagan and Haig and DeLorean and Brezhnev with jelly shoes and Aquanet wearing parachute pants that vomited cocaine and bullshit for fun. But Reagan, he stomped on Russia, the trade unions, and sold out co-conspirators like Ollie North. Cocaine and crack stomped on the lives of millions of Americans. Big money, big co, stomped on both the system and the little guy. The average, the struggling, the man in the street, the mom and pop. It just wasn't fully obvious yet. We were riding high on hairbands and Bruce Springsteen, born in the USA, baby. No, the economic orgies of the 80s and the come down from the crack pipe-like rush of the Reagan years would not truly be felt until the decade was retiring, under the presidency of George H.W. Bush Sr. And we were all left chasing the 80s, chasing money, chasing myth, chasing stability, chasing dreams. And Jack and I were chasing an invisible force that lay somewhere out just beyond reach, beyond the realm of your hand and the warm ocean's tide. Yeah, we were all chasing the 80s. Jack and I listened to cassette tapes as we navigated through those long Pennsylvania inclines and ran the van fast as it would go through its valleys, past Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, the smaller towns like Bloomsburg and Bellefonte and Snowshoe. The cassette tape turned and turned as the wheels under the VW turned and turned. Miles post passed like music from the stereo. Dylan, Eagles, Paul Simon. Jack and I slowly smoked a few bowls, talked, and covered miles in that VW camper like a sprint runner. And before we knew it, daylight hours were long behind us, and we were crossing into the state of Ohio. The rain had ceased, but the highway was still wet and not drying anytime soon in the hot, humid August nighttime. It was psychedelic and surreal, all of it. The moist highway air blowing in the open windows, the smell of the wet earth and asphalt, the light glinting off every wet thing we sped past. The bus was running in top form, and so were we, leaving the land of our youth behind us, and the distance between us and that place was ever growing as we continued west. We talked and laughed about places we might stop, talked about girls and the trouble we left behind. The great cities of the industrial plains south of the Great Lakes started to fall to the turning of our wheels one by one. First is the great once steel town of Youngstown, Ohio, once center of the American steel manufacturing. Soon, though, it was in the rearview mirrors and slipping quickly behind us and our wheels, south of Cleveland, a steel giant by any standard. At least it was before the steel crisis changed everything in the late 60s and early 1970s. It must have been hard watching everything you worked at, just stop. It crippled those towns, and that had ripple effects: stress, decline, health issues, crime, the human factor. But we, Jack and I, we were moving on, beating it on down the line. It was still the middle of the night anyhow, and these parts didn't seem to be inviting to a couple of teenagers heading west. What did seem inviting were the long stretches of blacktop laid out in front of our yellow headlights. Only the white stripe on the right side and our broken center line are guides, driving west. Little white ephedrine pills keeping me awake and alert to a point. One can only be awake for so long under the best of situations before weirdness ensues. But for now, everything is running like clockwork, and we are mostly on empty highways, passing under the bow of Lake Erie. Toledo, South Bend, more towns slip past, more time, more smoke, more beer, more talk. We can see the glow ahead. It's 3, maybe 4 in the morning. Greater Chicago is sprawling in front of us, casting its orange, high-pressure sodium glow into the night sky. We have driven quite a while now, and haven't been in any traffic per se since early in our trip. But suddenly, we are engulfed by a sea of lights, highway noises, and moving vehicles, bright signs, and police. The last several hours, we've just cranked the stereo, drank beer, and smoked pot. Probably a lot of pot. And the van probably smelled a little like that pot. We realize at this point that we've been driving with feral impunity and without care. It was time to get a hold of this before we paid an unfortunate penalty. We stashed the open weed, keeping only a pack pipe we could easily throw out the window, and finished our beers. Though We did keep smoking that pipe all the way through the South Chicago sprawl towns, rolling through Portage, through Gary, and then finally shot out the rifle barrel, baby, at Joliet, the last habitation of unearthly orange glow of high-pressure sodium lights, and into the black of corn and sky. We knew now this was where the real adventure began. Dawn on the American plains, the vastness and openness of endless rows of corn, pocked and broken only by farm compounds and their high-rising grain elevators, each top with a large emblazoned American flag, each being struck by the rose-colored sunlight of sunrise. We were somewhere in Illinois as the sun was coming up. We watched it crack over the corn in the side view mirror, corn still barely anything other than black as the night as we drove through. The sun, a red, gold, yellow, white wave spreading out over the land. Corn tassels looking as if they were peppered with 1 billion shining tiny diamonds in the warm August morning's dew. Prairie magic for a moment. Arlo Guthrie came on the Davenport FM station that we had turned the radio into. Good morning, America. That's what it is. As I peered behind and to the east, down 2 lanes of blacktop on which we came, and into the rising sun and the billions of shining timing diamonds. Oh my God. Whew! I needed that. Let me restart. As I peered behind and to the east, down the 2 lanes of blacktop on which we came, and into the rising sun and the billions of shining tiny diamonds, this moment was not lost on me. The sun, the song, that song. The power of being a feral child, breathing the corn-filtered, clean Midwestern summer air while doing 70 down the highway in my bug-like van. It all helped to forever etch it into the schemata of my existence. You want to stop for breakfast? Jeff queries. Yeah, I could use a meal and I could splash some hot water on my face, you know. I'm all sweaty from the road and those ephedrine pills make me sweat gritty bullets. I feel like a gym sock. Cool. Jack looks at me kind of funny. He hasn't known that I like eating those little white-crossed monsters till this trip. Let's look for a truck stop or something. Can't be too hard to find. We'll just look for one of those 76 signs. There's usually something around. I agree. I've been known to say that I feel the 80s are a sort of doorway from one America to the next. I don't want to run the risk of overstating this. The factors that have shaped our country to where it is in contemporary terms are many, but I should also not understate this. Political sewage fruit that was sown in the early 70s from the Nixon affairs and the insurgent religious right grew up in the 80s and fruited in the 90s. In the 80s, there were still a lot of folks who had a more of a mid-century conservative mindset, especially in the Midwest. There were a lot of Vietnam vets, Korea vets, World War II vets out there in what would become known as flyover country. There were a lot of farmers living more or less the way their daddies and granddaddies had, only with the addition of modern equipment. But their lives and rhythms were much the same. Reagan understood this. He knew how to speak to people, which was political gold, as increasingly the GOP was organizing discontent for their political fortune and future. And the GOP knew, and the folks on the ground, the discontented, they knew it too. Heads were on the chopping block, and power was at stake. But Reagan had that something. He had a gravitas, a charisma, a character that spoke to the hearts and minds of an America that drew its ideals from before Nam, before the Beats, the hippies, the Panthers, the Weathermen, and all the unrest at that snapshot of time, that moment in the 60s in America. No politician save possibly John Fitzgerald Kennedy's resurrected corpse could have beat Reagan. And even that may have been a stretch. Kennedy fared worse than Trump in the Electoral College. But Reagan just got through to a growing feeling of discontent. Feelings aren't something the media is very good at analyzing, nor really cares about, consistently casting the story as one of the ignorant corn seeds while pandering to their corporate sponsors and sucking on the money teat. Yes, Reagan in the 80s stomped all over whatever lay in their way. Reagan wasn't the answer, though. He was a painful hallucination whose legacy continues to haunt the American politics like a bad LSD trip. But he was a great ambassador for great change that occurred. And after all, he was a great character actor who had been paid his whole career to read lines and show emotion and to pull emotion from his audience. Who was better to sell the GOP lie? Hey buddy, want to take a chance? The dice are hot tonight. For me, the 80s is the space between two Americas. Soon, the death of the American dream was to be realized. Not yet had the banks sold everything to you via credit, enslaving you to a life of financial servitude. Not yet had our government stopped concerning itself with human capital, instead to only fillet the markets as savior, convincing a nation that the markets would solve everything, be everything, simply are the economic everything. It was a capitalist nightmare soon coming to bear upon us all. We were consumers, which mattered more to big money than our human value, and we consumed everything and everything thrown at us on the TV, but it was just stuff, bullshit, cars, Budweiser, VCRs. Drugs had yet to be marketed through either Joy Box, TV, nor radio. Neither had politics, really. Neither had the great argument. It was also during the 80s that the government stopped caring about the folks building cars and working in steel plants, stopped caring about plumbers and electricians, stopped caring about humans. This is, for me, where the lost middle of America went wrong. The middle that was wise and experienced, cool-hand Luke types. They put their faith in the GOP rhetoric, chasing former glory days. The GOP were farming their discontent. 40 years later, the media writes about them like they're a forgotten component, and they'd be right. Corporate America and their electric stooges have long since taken at them any worth aside from their electoral power. But the lost middle is stuck between a rock and a hard place, stuck between an allegiance to the warmth of older days and when they were secure and the pantry was fat, and those that exploit their advantage. An increasing pressure of consumer media-fed credit servitude. No, the only consistent argument in politics since the 80s is the argument. For both sides, it's the great shell game. The orange bus had rolled into the flat and geographically nondescript Christian Corn Belt. The hub of guys who distrusted and loathed and feared anything counterculture or long-haired. We chose to pull off the highway into a still brightly lit truck stop that had a tall sign, raised a good 100 feet into the air on what resembled a good old-fashioned football post that read 76. There were dozens of over-the-road rigs parked mind-numbingly close to one another, barely enough room to walk between. There were a couple of combines sitting alongside the truck stops in the parking lot in the open field. Everything was surreal in that moment. We had been moving for 15 plus hours straight, and stopping gave a kind of motion sickness that made you perceive the world was still moving around you. Added to this, I was wired to the nines from eating ephedrine, the white crosses, like Tic Tacs, drinking beer, and smoking weed ever since leaving Connecticut. Those little white crosses used to be available at just about any pharmacy at that point, only being banned in 2004. I pulled the van across the lot and past the gas and diesel pumps. Dead moths all over the place from flying too close to the halide lights. Oh, Icarus. I decide to pull in with the big rigs, kind of hide the van between their flanks. I spot and carefully back in tightly between two Freightliners. We come to terms with the lack of movement and compose ourselves a few minutes before we walk into the diner. Past bobblehead dolls and 25-cent amusement games. I noticed one of the guys at the professional truckers bar taps another on the side and motions at us. He turns with a sinister glee. Holy Christmas. He turns with a sinister glee. Faggots. I am immediately on edge. Did you just hear what he said? No. What? He called us faggots. Jack immediately looks nervous, and I'm sure I do as well. But we continue to a booth and sit by large glass windows where we can see the big rigs out on 80, heading west in the now brightening daylight. I get up and go to the men's room to wash up, and I'm worried about being assaulted in some way. I could see the headlines. Young man beaten and left drowning in a 76 truck stop toilet. This was not the kind of stress that a person wired up on whites needs. I washed up and was on my way out when a large cowboy hat-wearing man came in. I sneak past him as he stares at me with my unkept tie-dye and cut-off army BDUs and long hair. Jack goes and washes up after a few minutes, and we aren't so popular anymore. The guys at the counter focused on the task at hand, eating. They kept looking over now and again, though, laughing, muttering jokes on our account. I asked for our check. We paid it and got up to leave. I look over at the trucker's counter and saw the first guy to notice us earlier tap the guy next to him on the shoulder, and then brought us up to the attention of the others. They say something to the waitress who looks at us as they start to leave their counter stools. Fuck, dude, I say to Jack under my breath. Let's get the fuck out of here. Jack turns to look, and we quickly head out to the parking lot. The counter boys pursue, but go to the lot where all the regular cars park. But I had pulled in with the big rigs, backing my van in between the two Freightliners. As we come up to my bus, there's a trucker dressed in black jeans and black shirt and black cowboy hat, kicked back on his head looking at my bus. He turns and looks at us. Hey, you guys back that up in there? Yes, sir, I reply, worrying about the posse soon to be upon us. Damn, you got some skills for a hippie kid. I laugh and kind of push past. Ha ha, thanks, I try. He stumbles back a bit as I slide between the rig and the van. I jump in, turn the key, and the orange van fires up to a Spitfire purr. The trucker clearly wondering what is happening. I drop the clutch, and we lurch out into the lot to see the posse coming around the side of the building, stopping to watch us tear out of the dirt lot, gravel flying. I hit the asphalt fast and straight line onto the on-ramps, building up to near 75 to ensure some breathing room between us and anyone who may follow. The sun was fully up now, and the day was hot over the Corn Belt. We rolled down the windows and put a cassette in. And the jailer man said to Sailor Sam, we're searching everyone for the band on the run. And that's the way it actually happened.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Look at that. We got our musical after all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Totally impromptu. You never know what's going to happen.